Well,
Yeah, I love it.
Well, probably about time. Are we ready? Hopefully a few other people will come in the meantime, both on Zoom and here, but we're grateful to have a few fun people on the Zoom, Bob and Gloria Reese and Ann, and I don't know if Giles is there too, Florence. Anyway, thank you for being here. It's a busy time of year. So many people said, oh darn, I have a conflict. Or, you know, it's the season to be super busy, it seems like. But I'm grateful that you are here, and I'm grateful for you, David, being here, and Rochelle. Where did Rochelle?
I get more here, sorry.
Did you guys have a little spat by the time you got here? You were fine when you came.
we can travel in 2 cars, so it's like easier.
So there's Rochelle, Dave Ostler's wife. There's Rochelle's husband, Dave Ostler. Just to be fair.
We introduced ourselves that way at the mission president seminar.
Oh, okay.
Benoit was not amused.
But now it's not amused, huh? Oh, that's funny. He's fair to me.
Keep it up.
Let's see, Ed. So this is Ed and Kristen, they're Kristen in the back. This is their home that are hosting. Thank you for hosting. So
Well,
much.
welcome everyone. We love for you guys to bring your spirits into our home. It makes things wonderful. So thank you. There's a bathroom down the hall and there's donuts and
Thanks to
nuts,
Ross.
thanks to Ross. And so help yourself. I'm sorry the people at Zoom can't participate in the food.
They can pretend, I guess. And they can't use your restroom either, I suppose.
But thanks for bringing all these people and all the good ideas into our home. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thanks for being a part of it. Appreciate it so much. All right, I'm gonna get you dizzy spinning this thing around every time. So I thought it'd be fun. We haven't done this in a while, but to go around the room, since it's not too packed tonight, and just take a brief moment, one sentence of something that you're grateful for or passionate about right now in life. So, Rochelle, we'll start with you, if that's okay.
I just started piano lessons again. Can you believe I can't see the piano teacher? But
Wow.
yeah, I thought maybe I've got 20 more years and maybe I can learn a song or two. So I'm being passionate about piano right now.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Very cool. Pam, in the back behind the couch.
Yeah, well, I'm also passionate about piano right now.
Oh,
Started practicing again and it felt really good. And I'm also passionate about life and my husband is not dead. I'm really passionate about that.
Is he on the verge?
Flatline died almost.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Well, this is not, you'll have to tell me more.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Ooh,
no, it's his turn next. Yeah, really.
yeah.
There we go.
So
Yeah, you're passionate about just being alive.
I'm Pam's husband, Alan. I don't know, I mean, the experience of, you know, basically being near death, was really calm and peaceful, which I find interesting.
For him.
It was not for my life. For me, it was, and I guess that gave me a different perspective of the remaining time, however long that is. That maybe I am okay, because I'm one of those people that has always felt like, well, gee, I never measure, no matter how hard I try. And so, and of course, the church talks often, some of them don't help.
Yeah.
Along those lines. And so maybe that's what I'm passionate about, is trying to figure out how to enjoy the remainder and not worry so much about
So maybe it's a blessing,
it. At least a wake up
a
call,
wake up call. I don't know.
an unconscious wake up.
I'm glad you're conscious. So, sir, can we see you back there? Name, serial number, and what's your?
I'm Jeff, Sherry's husband.
I love it, I love it.
Grateful for the incredibly yummy Indian food we had right before we came.
Nice.
And what?
Well, you should share where it was. So we can
Oh.
go.
Little India, who has a store And Southern Utah County and Heber just opened out the last roads. And it's-
Oh, good.
and then I'm passionate about, we have a group similar to like this that we've organized in Alpine where we live.
Oh, great.
And last night we had author come and we had a very good discussion on book banning.
Book Manny.
Banner.
Oh, book Manny.
Was you in favor or opposed?
Adamantly opposed.
Okay.
He was an author after all.
So, yeah, that's what I'm grateful
So you
for.
get more competition.
Very cool.
I'm Sherry. I'm grateful for summer. I work in a grade school, so.
That's really grateful, yeah. Charlene?
I am Charlene and I am very grateful and passionate about amazing people and fabulous conversations.
Well, you got amazing people
That's
here.
why I'm
We're
here.
gonna have a good
Thank you.
conversation.
Pressure's on.
Huh?
The other part,
Pressure's on, that's right.
Okay. I'm Carol and I guess my current passion is tap dancing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How good is this day? Can she do it? Well, that's fun. Good for you.
I know, I had something, but I didn't care.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm also a school teacher, and so fun, Haley and I work at the same school. Well, anyway, we didn't know we were each gonna be here, and one of our students' families owns a little India restaurant.
Oh my God. Really? Wow, are you connected or what?
All of us, just today, 2 days ago. So I am passionate about it being summer also because I've been working a lot. I teach at 2 different adult education institutions and my little son just got home with his mission like 3 weeks ago. So now I could just enjoy being with him.
This is so cool.
Little fun.
He's my youngest, he's little to be.
Very, very fun. And your hubby's traveling, right?
Yeah,
As he often does.
well, he's not my hubby anymore also.
Oh, okay. So you made it final.
So I'm single, everybody. And so, yeah.
That's actually single. Hey, Spencer, you want to go? This is what, something you're grateful for or passionate about briefly? I'll get to it in a second.
I'm grateful to be sitting down. I've been moving last couple of days, so it's nice.
Oh, wow.
I'm passionate, about I just only had a chance to look at the things today, the list, I didn't read them. But the thing that gets me excited is the scientific journal paper, psychology, sociology, social psych stuff. That gets me fired up.
That gets you fired up. Very fun. Sir Taylor,
Something I'm grateful for and passionate about.
either one, just.
Oh, either
briefly,
one.
Yeah,
I
or
just,
or both if you want to.
you know, this is the strangest thing. I have been feeling so grateful the last few weeks for the weeds in my yard. Because of the abundance of the earth that gives and gives and gives. And I'm passionate, I'm growing in my passion to try and make sure it stays that way.
I like that.
Define what it is.
I like that. All right.
Just get a sign that says meadow in progress.
Kristen and Anna?
Okay, well, I was gonna say Jesus, but that's just like, so I made this chimichurri sauce tonight and I'm starting to be passionate about that.
Say it again. What did you make?
Chimichurri sauce.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah, okay.
I'm most passionate about my work. I'm working on a slope adaptive foot and it's going really well and that's.
Cool.
And I'm also, I happen to be Kristen's husband. And I'm passionate about.
That's great. I'm happy to see you two still together.
I'm Killeen and I'm passionate, not about the weeds in my yard, but about the flowers that I see where the roses out front, like I'm just seeing so many beautiful things right now.
Yeah. That's Kelly. Give your names too.
I'm Dave, and actually did some things with you guys with Interweave
Yeah.
a while back.
Yeah.
Remember both of you, so yes, I'm Lynn Curtis.
Yeah.
And I am passionate about traveling, just spent quite a bit of time with, my 3 sons and traveled to Japan and just got back a few days ago, and it was a lot of fun.
How cool is that?
Yeah, so got one going on a mission, one getting married, and then a third one in high school, so it's just great to have all 3 of them together. So it was
That's fun. Well, thanks for being here. You two. Haley, welcome.
I'm Haley. I'm passionate about the little tiny creepy crawlies of this earth, including the really cool tick that I pulled out.
Oh, no.
Pulled out when I stopped yesterday after my hike. Before I had the chance to burrow into it. It's really cool.
I didn't know ticks were cool. That's, I don't think you think ticks are cool.
Actually, a big.
You took care of them.
That's great. So Ross.
Yes, hi, I'm Ross, and I am grateful for the number of people, number of organizations in the country that are doing the kind of work today that is exemplified by David's book.
Nice. You want to name a few? Just
Brave
top of mind
Angels,
few.
Living Room Conversation, Bridge USA. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Camille?
Hi, I'm Camille and I'm passionate about traveling as well. And
Well, you should be, because it's your part of your work.
as a young girl, I always wanted to be a flight attendant, and now at age 65, I am. And I'm loving it and taking full advantage of my life. Just got back from California, just flew in. I still have time to go.
Well, thanks for being here.
You've got someone that wants to be. admitted.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, normally I would have somebody managing that. Okay, why don't you take this chair over here, David? The seat of honor.
Are you passionate about Jay?
Oh, I forgot about me.
Yeah, don't.
I'm passionate about you guys all being here. I am. I just, that's why I've done this for 11 years. I just appreciate people like you coming and sharing your thoughts and feelings, and people like David who, you're all smarter than me, but David's, written a book or two, and as some of you have, and I'm grateful that I am allowed to tap into the research and thinking that you all do, and that you care deeply about life enough to come and gather and talk about what's on your heart. So thank you. All right, sir.
Well, I want you to know what I'm passionate about. First off, I'm Michelle's husband. But I'm passionate about being chill. I've decided that I spent a lot of my life kind of climbing the ladder, and it's kind of nice not to be on a ladder and to, let life kind of transpire at the pace you want, as opposed to the pace that is imposed on you. So is that a passion, to be chill?
It's a good passion.
So I like that. So should I start?
Dive in.
We're gonna have more of a discussion than kind of a lecture. I'm not wanting to do that tonight. I think that a group like this for me, is a perfect group because we get to interact a lot. So I'm gonna tee up some stuff and we're gonna talk about some things I've written about, but it's not really about what I wrote. It's really about us maybe having a little self-discovery and understanding ourselves a little bit in context of the work I did around understanding polarization and contention. So I did write a book. It's here. It's called Healing Our Divides. It's basically taking the concerns that we have about the polarization in our country that sometimes spills into our personal relationships, our family, our local community, our congregations, where it's difficult for us to just get along with people who have different beliefs. I think we see that, and my guess is we would all be concerned about that. And that's really how I wrote the book and the direction that I did. But I'm not going to talk about how do we depolarize the world. I don't know how to do that. I can tell you why it's polarized. I can tell you kind of some of the social issues that are going on that kind of create that division and the contention that's there. But what I really want to focus in on tonight is how we as humans see the world imperfectly. And because of those imperfections in us that are natural because we're human, they're not bad things. It's not because we're sociopaths. We just have limitations with the way we see the world. And because of that, we both contribute to contention, but more than that, we don't see things clearly. So I want to talk about that, and I want to kind of go into a discovery with you about what those issues are, because they're in each of us in a particular way. So this is kind of an inner work as opposed to an outer work. And Ross mentioned some of the groups that are working on that outer work. They're really important, and I hope they're successful. But for me, I want to understand my limitations of seeing the world. There's a scripture that Paul writes that we see through a glass darkly. We see the world with filters and with imperfections that come from being human. And I want to explore that a little bit, because if we don't explore that, number one, we're going to contribute to the problem that we're also concerned about. But number two, we won't better understand truth or belief or how to approach the issues that we are confronted in society. So I want to pose a question to you, and some of you might be brave enough to answer it. I hope some of you are. And I will answer it first. Have you ever had a belief that you held very strongly? Can I do this? I just saw someone wants to come in.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you ever had a belief that you felt really strongly in, that later, maybe years later, maybe half a lifetime later, you came to believe is completely wrong? So let me tell you, I'll tell you two. I'll tell you the simple one. When I was 9, I had a debate with my dad about what century it was. I was convinced it was the 19th century because it was 1964.
Yeah.
You know, clearly the 19 in the year made the century. And I still to this day remember arguing with my dad about it, trying to explain to him as carefully as I could. No, Dad, you know, it's 1967. And, you know, I'm not sure I ever believed him in that argument. I eventually figured out that it was really the 20th century, but I was convinced of that. So that's a minor one. It's kind of funny, and it shows how we've all done stupid things like that. But I'll tell you another one that I have that's maybe a little bit more serious. My career was in the business of healthcare. Worked in hospitals and insurance companies and pharma and data analysis and software and all that stuff in the US. I worked for a pretty big healthcare organization. And I had really strong feelings about kind of the superiority of the US healthcare system. Some of the problems were kind of market force issues that contributed to some of the quality and cost issues. And then my company sent me to Europe. And I was responsible for taking American tools in healthcare to the British NHS, to the German Health Service, to China and the like. And, you know, lo and behold, I figured out that not all of the ideas that I had about the US healthcare system were right. I'm in my 50s. And I'm trying to sell stuff to the British that have a healthcare system that delivers the same quality of healthcare at half the cost. And I had a deconstruction of my beliefs about healthcare. I was completely wrong on so many dimensions. And I really thought I was right. You know, I was an executive of business. They trusted me enough to run an international business. And, you know, I found that many of my beliefs about healthcare were substantially wrong. It's been interesting. It contributed to a political deconstruction. I ended up having to face a world that I didn't understand, and I thought I did, but because of one of these issues, I ended up having to kind of review my assumptions about the role of government, the way market forces work, you know, and a lot of stuff. So I came back very different from the UK with regards to my beliefs about the community, about how to establish policy, governmental policy, the role of regulators, the role of market forces. So that's just one that, you know, I was pretty convinced when I went there, and I came back completely convinced in a very different way. Maybe I'm still wrong, I'm not sure, but it changed a substantial belief. So let me, as I kind of put out those two circumstances, does anyone else have something?
I'll share. I mean, I have a bunch. And as I get older, I'm like, oh. But the one that sticks out into me, first and foremost, is the LGBTQ issue. I strongly believed that that was a sin. There's no way God made those people, and they had a temptation just like people have temptations to steal or to lie. And I felt that way strongly for a long time. And I do not believe that.
No. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have
He
something?
presented well at the gay pride parade, you guys.
Yeah, we got married, we just celebrated our 14th anniversary. We got married that first week of June during the Pride Parade. And my feeling, if you would have told me then that 14 years later, I would be marching in the Pride Parade, I would have said, you are loony. You are loony. There is no way on this earth that I would ever do that.
Looked like you had fun, you and your daughters.
Yeah, we did.
Someone else have one to share? Be nice to have just one more. Go ahead.
So when I was young, I felt like we were taught that if we did everything we could do as a parent, that we would have a cohesive family. It wouldn't necessarily go exactly as you expect, but it would be cohesive. And I did everything I could do to learn how to be that kind of father. And it hasn't turned out that way. And I've looked around at other great people I know. And realized that it's far more common that the experience is it doesn't work that way. And we've been taught for so long to believe that if we just do what we need to do, it'll all work out. And the reality is, at least in this life, that's really not true for the majority of families.
Yeah. Go ahead, one more.
I have one that probably relates to what you're talking about, but I used to believe that you could know anything, you could know something, I love the definition in the Doctrine and Covenants that truth is knowledge as things as they were, as they are, and as are to come. But because of my limitations, because of my flawed frame of reference, and because of my, past experiences, I don't think I could see anything totally truthfully because I'm flawed. And I don't think we can know anything until we become more perfect and more, in other words, the closer our perception of truth is, the closer we are to having a Christ-like character or enlightened, this character, the more our perception of truth is closer to what truth really is. So I don't think you can know anything.
So that's a great transition, Jay.
Could I just bridge that? What you said, I thought about a lot, that scripture. As they were, as they are come. To me, the thought has come to me more than once that is a good definition of evolution. That it doesn't mean truth is seen by us as static all the time, but that it evolves.
See, I still believe in the absolute nature of truth, but in my ability to perceive truth.
That's what I'm pointing to.
Not absolute.
But I mean, from an
evolved
LDS theology, we believe that God wasn't always what God is right now. And the truth is the same, that God was maybe, if that's true, God was maybe once like we are. And so they're both true, but they're different.
When we ask, to God, is this true? He smiles at us and says, you're not at a point where you can even understand truth. You're on
First
the right
of all, you're
track,
saying
but you're on the right. He or she, yeah.
There you go. I like that.
Okay.
Or they, she, they.
So there's a tweet that I like. I spent some time in that terrible cesspool. But it's a tweet that says, your experience is about 0.00000001% of the reality of the earth, right? That's about what we think, based on that extent of knowledge about the earth, we think we understand about 60% of it. You know, so our ability to understand reality based on this 0.000000 whatever, infinitesimally small perspective in time, place, context, whatever, is pretty teeny. Now, I want to ask you another question, and it really relates to your comment. How do you know something? What is the process by where you come to know something? And then a follow-up on this. So, you know, what is the process that happens in our minds that causes us to come to a particular belief? And then there's a follow-up question is, how do we know that we know something? Does anyone want to take a crack at that?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, that's pretty deep.
Yeah.
Here first, and then I think we had a couple. So we'll go to 3 comments here, and then I'll talk a little bit about the way neuroscientists think about this.
Several decades ago, I wondered, is there absolute truth? Something that's always true all the time? And I have so far come up with 2 things.
Which are?
It is wrong to teach hatred.
Okay.
It's not wrong to hate, but it's wrong to teach someone to hate. And secondly, greed is evil.
Okay.
That's the only things that I know that are true all the time.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And as you,
How did I come to that?
yeah, that's the,
Well, thinking about things that are right or that have been told or whatever, the 10 Commandments is where I started. No, it's not always wrong to not kill. No, it's not always right to honor your father and mother. So what is right all the time? And so it's kind of thinking about something, and is there a negative case for that? Is there a time when it is not true?
okay, thanks. Let's go to Ross, and then, did I see your hand up?
Yeah.
So we'll go here and then here, and then I'll kind of share some thoughts of a neuroscientist that I like.
Yeah, this is complicated. I think there's a lot of facets in this. And some of them we don't even realize. I am going to throw out. It seems to me that a lot of times, in one sense or another, beliefs are things that happen to us.
Okay.
And that needs expanding, but I want to go there. Another thing that can happen is that I can have a belief and not even realize it. And the one that really brought that home for me is I can still remember the moment when I heard on my car radio that John Lennon died. And I didn't realize just how he was killed, he was murdered. I didn't realize how much I thought that was not even possible that John Lennon could leave the earth like that. I didn't realize just it was such a shock to me. So just 2 things, and it's really complicated, I think, Dave.
I think it is.
Yeah.
So let's go here. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Spencer.
Spencer.
I've had a couple of thoughts on this topic lately. And one is when people talk about knowing, talk about this just in regular conversation or like deep philosophical stuff, it seems to be always connected to some truth, know a truth. And I feel like one thought I've had recently is some truths are truer than others. There's different hierarchies. It's true we're sitting here, which is a different kind of truth than there's an afterlife with three degrees. And that's uncomfortable sometimes for people to think, oh, no, everything has to be the same as like, it's not, or getting I've had some difficulty in trying to gain comfort with different levels of truth, but knowing this is. Knowing what that is, and maybe this is part of the discussion and or whatever, it's just like you think you can know something and then later you're like, oh, I knew it. We sometimes, use, with every fiber of my being, and it was wrong.
Like my 19th century thing.
Yeah, but then it's also like. So I don't know, somehow those two are related to me, that we can know something so deeply and it doesn't, I don't know if it. Whenever I get into this sort of. Thinking that, oh yeah, cling to nothing. Let it, this loosen your grip, that's how I talk myself through that. Loosen your grip. On everything.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I can know, or how, I don't know.
Okay, so let me.
Get ways down, I don't know.
I think
Well,
we
I'm very
can,
articulate, but it's sort of like that's what spins around in my.
we can spend all night talking about this. I think it's a fascinating area. I want to separate the spiritual issues from the physical issues. Because people can study the physical issues. It's pretty difficult to study the spiritual issues, right? We don't have spiritual fMRI machines or, some of these other devices, but we can study some of this through biology and through neurology. So there's a neuroscientist, I think he's a neurologist, who wrote a book on being certain, believing you're right even when you're not. And in this book, he talks about how he talks about a feeling of believing or a feeling of knowing. And he suggests that it's fundamentally an emotion. And here is what he describes happening. We take an issue and we interrogate it to a certain point. And once we get to a point where we are comfortable, we accept it as something, as a belief. Doesn't have to be a spiritual belief. It can be a belief about immigration. It can be a belief about our identities or whatever it is. And when we reach that, our brain releases neurochemicals that give us this feeling of satisfaction in such a way that we lock in that belief and it becomes persistent in our mind. And then it can change, but only if we're willing to, only if there is enough disconfirming information to dislodge that feeling of knowing in our brains. Let me share you a little story here. There was a group of religious believers living in Illinois in 1954. And they believed that there was going to be a flood and that a spaceship was going to save them. And they had a specific date on that, and that was December 21st, 1954. We're still here, so we know how the story ends. And they sold all their possessions. They said goodbye to all their friends and family members. And lo and behold, that belief was wrong. So the next day, reporters were involved in this. They were pretty public about this. So it wasn't kind of a secret set of beliefs. So the next day they're talking to reporters, and so they had this feeling of knowing. They had a pretty significant disconfirming event. And what was their response, do you think?
Miscalculated.
That's a possible response?
Yeah, they recalculated, found the error. I'm gonna guess that a number of them continue to believe, set a new date, and it was that second time that the finally disbanded. So I haven't told you the full story, so this is actually the fourth date where it didn't happen. So they made it through a number of these. It was gonna be on December 18th, and yeah, they find excuses, they find reasons.
So
to hang on to what.
They changed their theology.
well, they concluded that their positive vibes around this caused God to extend mercy. So this feeling of knowing becomes really persistent in us. And I'm glad it does, because I have a feeling of knowing about how to drive a car. And I don't want to have that be interrogated every moment. Right? I don't want to, and Rochelle says maybe you ought to interrogate that.
At least more often.
But, basically, I've developed a model around driving. It's persistent. I'm not going to revisit that unless I have some sort of significant, like black eyes or a deer jumps out in front of you. You might update the model, but you're basically still have that feeling of what is right and how to drive. Burton says about this feeling, let me get the quote from him. He says, the feeling of knowing, the reward for both proven and unproven thought, is learning's best friend and mental flexibility's worst enemy. So I had a belief locked in about the 19th century. I also had a belief locked in about American style healthcare. I have a belief locked in about everything that I do to function in life. And most of it is right, but some of it is really wrong. And I don't know which it is because I have that feeling in my brain that locks it in. Question over here.
If the flip side, if this is just knowing that as humans, uncertainty makes us really, really uncomfortable. And then we have those hormones that cause us that anxiety when we don't know. So looking toward that answer, locking it in is such a.
How would we function as a species if we were always interrogating the models in which we live through life? We couldn't do that, right? So it is a real important characteristic that allows us to function in life, but it also blocks us when, let's just say that we were transported 100 years and we're living in Alabama, and this conversation was about the civil rights movement. And we're a bunch of white people sitting here talking about that. We could reflect back on that 100 years later and know that probably pretty much everything that we had said in that setting was wrong. But in that moment, we would have been locked into a belief that that was right. And, you can see that throughout society where culture or the way we live locks us into a particular set of feelings of knowing that then upon reflection, maybe a century later, maybe in our own lifetime, we say, we were really wrong on that. Go ahead.
So I think it's really interesting to think of it about as an emotion and perhaps storytelling to ourselves, because that's a strength of humans as well. Because I'm on the autism spectrum, and so emotion doesn't make as much sense to me. And I don't have as much trouble when thinking about an idea and I find evidence. I perk up and say, oh, this is cool. What's the actual evidence gonna say?
Yeah.
And so it may be, because when I compare myself to my siblings who are not on the autism spectrum, they can't let go of long-held beliefs. And I look at it and say, well, I just had 5 pieces of evidence that are on the contrary, so let's find a new model. And it's because the lack of emotion, and emotions are not innate in me. I don't seem riveted as hard to those stories and those emotions.
Yeah. And some of this, will also be his verbiage tying it to emotion. Another word that he could use here is also talk about how coming to a belief is a subconscious as opposed to a conscious cognition. So some beliefs that I hold that 2 + 2 is 4. I can interrogate that in a conscious cognition. I can't interrogate some of these other beliefs in a conscious way because they kind of come to you. They come to you from the culture you live in, from the life experience you have, from the innate and often genetic values that we have. Some people have genetics that would take them to be more trusting of strangers. Some are very mistrustful of strangers. And that will affect the fundamental beliefs that they end up holding. So my point in kind of coming to this is that we need to be cautious about how we think we know something, and that it comes through processes that we can't always interrogate. They're not laboratory experiments. My belief about healthcare was not a laboratory experiment. Your belief about LGBTQ before your beliefs change came through culture or other uninterrogated processes. It's the way we grew up. It's what was the norm, what we saw on TV, what our family taught us, and the like, and we're products of that. And those beliefs come from someplace inside our brain that is harder to interrogate.
Yeah.
One or two more comments, and then we'll go to some other work.
And I think it's also just worth pointing out that the act of interrogating fundamentally changes stuff.
Yeah,
Because those subconscious processes are experienced and felt, and when we cognize them and put language and labels, and they're no longer the same thing. And we have to be careful thinking that we can pull them out of context and make sense of them.
and I just want to expand on this because there's an interesting two-edged sword on that. So if you have, let's say someone is talking about, let's pick a topic, immigration. And they're in favor of restricting immigration and building a wall and deporting a lot of people. When you interrogate them and say, why do you come to that belief? And try and pull that up into conscious cognition. The scientists, psychologists will say that generally people will make up answers to retain that harmony of that feeling of knowing. And they'll just make stuff up. That's not why they believe it, but they're creating reasons why that belief is inside them or why they can justify that. But at other times when we interrogate that and aren't maybe put on the spot or there's some other conditions that are there, then real learning can happen and we can change our beliefs. So it's kind of interesting that the least effective way of having someone change their belief is ask them to describe why they believe it. Because if they do, their belief will become more firm because their explanations will be self-justifying. We had a comment over here.
Yeah, I would say something that's not related to this. My two grandsons, the youngest ones, are 3 and 5.
Speak up, Lynn, would you?
My two youngest grandsons are 3 and 5. And when I sit down and talk with them, they know a lot of things. They're sure of a lot of things.
Ask them what century it is.
That's everything. That's the truth of the universe spins around Big Wheel. But you know, I can kind of laugh and watch, you're gonna grow and you're gonna change and you get a more nuanced understanding. And I really feel that compared with all the truth that's out there, spiritual, physical, everything, we're kind of like the 3-year-old or less. We hear headlines and they might be totally not, but our ability, going back to Ed's statement, is our ability to know things is so tiny. You used this tiny percentage, and I think we're maybe less than that.
Yeah. You can't have enough zeros here.
Yeah, I find that more comforting, though. I think, okay, what's the phrase? Love this crooked world with all your crooked heart. We try as hard as we can to be good, to be righteous, to be correct. And it falls short all the time.
And, you know, I used to internalize that as being a moral failing. I think we underestimate the physicalness of those kinds of things. And, you know, our brains are not computers. They have ways that they miscompute. We call this bias. And it happens all the time because of neurons and brain chemicals and the fact that my brain's only this big. You know, there's just real physical limitations that exist there. And I think we should just kind of cut ourselves some slack and get where you said, which is, it's harder for me to believe. I don't know, I suspend my certainty because I realize that I cannot figure it all out. Okay, we had one comment here and there, and then I'm gonna go on.
Okay, me?
Yeah.
It's not just the fellow you read there, but Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, and I think I can paraphrase him accurately, related to this, said that confidence is a feeling, it isn't a judgment, and that feeling comes automatically. So there's another voice kind of seconding what you said. The other thing I wanted to say was, I don't know if you quite addressed or if you come across anything that on Haley's point about how uncomfortable uncertainty can be.
vary. I don't know.
Go ahead, Andy. That's all right. I just want to see if you
I
had
think
anything.
everything that I say lately comes from the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky that I've been reading, and so like I'm seeing everything through that biology, starting at the very minuscule here, and then the broadening out into culture and whatnot, so it probably came from there as well.
Okay, yeah.
You know, we're physical. And the way we live in the world is based on the physical limitations of that. Can you imagine just being so comfortable with uncertainty in your life and what that would do to you?
It's fun.
On some dimensions.
Yes.
But like every glass of water that you pour, is this water? Is this mercury? Is water good for you? Will it work in my body? And, you know, you can't examine every possible thing. There are higher level issues that we can examine, and we can live in a humble uncertainty. A number of people have expressed that tonight, and I think that's fine. But the same brain that can get there also has to deal with all these mundane tasks that we do. The way we gesture, the way we drive, the way we interact with people. And we can't live in uncertainty in that. We'd be paralyzed. We function, we have to walk, we have to teach, we have to do whatever. So one comment over here. Okay. So now I want to go to some specific exercises to talk about how our brains often misinterpret truth. And I want to get some reflections. Maybe you have some stories about where you've experienced this. So I'm going to go through what I call cognitive bias. And what that means is where our brain comes to an objectively wrong conclusion. And there's a number of different kind of bias. You could, you know, name them all, you know, and we'd be here all night. But I'm going to go through some of them and I'll describe them. And then to the degree that you have felt that, perhaps you can share, or to the degree that you have felt that you have overcome that kind of bias, you can share. Okay, and we'll maybe do 2 comments with each form of bias, because there's a lot and some of them are really fun to talk about. At least they are for me. So one we talk about often is confirmation bias, right? And so basically when we hear speech that conforms to what we believe, we trust it. And when we hear speech or arguments or discussion where we disagree with it, we tend to dismiss it. And we're more attracted to listen to things we agree with than to go into this disconfirming, uncertain kinds of discussions. Does that make sense? Does anyone have an experience with that? And then how do you combat that?
Having that experience right now.
So good.
Happy to be with you.
That's so true though, because I mean, I've experienced the same thing here in this kind of group, but when something comes up on Instagram, social media, that is like not what I want, it's like, that's so stupid, which is almost like the reverse of the confirmation bias, I guess. I don't know what it's called.
Well, it is. We seek things that agree with us and avoid things that disagree with
Yeah,
us.
and I tend to dismiss the person, you know, not just that idea or thought, but just like, oh, that person
sucks.
You know. Yeah.
Sorry, we don't like the word suck at our house. And sometimes it comes out and I'm a little embarrassed. Being Rachel's husband. Should be better than that.
Say a word, say it.
Yeah, we take people who have different points of view and we otherize them from that, right? We think they're enemies, we think they're, you know, we give them all sorts of labels, apostates, Marxists.
Or just don't listen. I mean, that's what I find myself, I mean, it's not just on Instagram, it's like, I just stopped listening to them as a person.
Yeah, we dismiss them. How do you get over this one?
Like you said, if someone says something you disagree with and you ask them why, they'll make up things. I want to know why you think that. So how do I?
So there's a good kind of construct that gets you to a better place on that. And it's you ask, how did you come to that belief? And what it does is it helps it's actually pretty effective in terms of helping someone change their beliefs, but it causes them to open up and interrogate their own process that got them to the feeling of knowing. It's not threatening, so it's not disconfirming in and of itself. And there's, I write about it in the book. There's different epistemologies, ways in which we come to know something. So one of them might be religious. A religious leader told us this. So if you're talking to someone about abortion and you say, why are you pro-choice or pro-life? What you want to understand is not why they're that, but what was their underlying epistemology that led them there. It may have been, their mother decided not to abort them. And so they have a very personal identity to the abortion. If abortion, my mom had aborted, I would not be here. Or maybe a prophetic leader, or maybe an issue of justice and autonomy and freedom. And, so what you want to do is you want to kind of interrogate the process that got them there. And you'll learn more than if you give them an opportunity to justify kind of their belief. That's maybe beyond that, beyond the scope of what we want to talk about. But I think that's a good set of questions to ask there. Another one would be, have you always thought that way? Is there been something in your life that caused you to develop that belief and kind of get underneath the covers in a very safe way to allow them to then interrogate these feelings? Other thoughts about how we can overcome confirmation bias?
And the way I'm working, I don't think I've overcome it, but what I'm working towards is very related to this comment over here. I'm trying to learn to live with the anxiety of confronting things that disconfirm my view, my worldview. And I'm noticing the way I respond to that anxiety and trying to allow it to persist so that I can stay in a relationship with someone. I don't have to change right in that moment, but at least I'm trying to, I have a practice of trying to let it be.
It's like your weeds. That's what you said about your weeds.
Yeah, you're
That's exactly what you said
Let it
about
be.
your weeds. Let it be.
I'm sure my neighbors love that.
Yeah, they have some things to share with you.
Yeah, they have some disconfirming feedback.
One more.
Well, before this meeting, I was telling Ross I had lunch on Wednesday with someone that was a Trump lover and someone that was a Trump hater, and they were just going after it, which is, watching. But I think one of the things that helps me is just what we've been talking about, to realize that each of those two individuals have different backgrounds, different frame of references, different, ways that they came to their beliefs and trying to understand those, okay? And so I was just playing with each of them and trying to tell them some of the things that, like one was like, how could members of the church vote for someone with that kind of character, And I told them, well, there's a lot of LDS people that are just so adamant about pro-life that they plug their nose and vote for Trump, and and then I went on the other, I said something that made the other point of view a little bit more reasonable, but I think it's trying to find out why people, believe what they believe and understand, and there usually is a reasonable way. That's what Better Angels is trying to do. He's going to a conference for Better Angels in Wisconsin this next week. I'd love to hear what you learned.
I'll take notes.
Yeah.
So let me give you an observation about what I think, how you deal with confirmation bias. You will always have it. And there will be moments where you're having a conversation like people are describing, where you'll be able to recognize it and you'll be able to use some tools to do it. But it will affect you every day because it's hardwired into our brains. It just is. So an example of that, some of you might be old enough to remember this, some not, but Coke launched a product called New Coke in mid-80s. It was a massive failure. They took all of the data, used confirmation bias, said this is going to be a winner. And the data didn't say that. But the people interpreting it used confirmation bias to believe that their cool new product that they were going to get lots of bonuses on, that the data supported the belief that this would be a winner. So we'll have it. You can't get rid of it. But you can, in certain settings, be aware of it to the degree that you can moderate it and have it avoid blowing up your lunch or your Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe you can even get more adept to it so that you can eliminate or moderate it or minimize it, but it's just part of our hardwiring, so it's going to be there. Next form of bias. I'm not sure this is my favorite one, but I like this one a lot. This is identity or group bias. So we tend to be more charitable to people and beliefs expressed by those we identify with, and to those we consider in our own group. We tend to be skeptical for people in another group, other groups. So here's the science on this, and I'm a nerd. But there's these things called fMRI machines. They measure which part of your brain is working when something happens. And so they put people in fMRI machines. And like, let's say they put a Republican in, and they read a statement that they don't know is by Barack Obama. And they say, this is a statement. Do you agree with it? And it, it was by Paul Ryan or Mitt Romney or something like that. And one part of their brain will light up. And if they tell them that it's by Obama, a different part of their brain will light up. When we hear something from a group that we don't identify with, we use a different part of our brain than when we hear something from a group that we identify with. And it gets even weirder. If they show people pictures and ask them to rate the attractiveness of the person, they're uglier if they're from the opposing set of beliefs. Physically uglier. They rate them with lower levels of attraction. So these other people are actually literally in our minds uglier than people who are in our own minds of the same group or identity. And you can pick the identity. It can be a political party, it can be religious, it can be a racial group, it can be a hobbyist or, whatever. But that's the way our brains work. So how's that for weird? I think it's really cool. And I think it happens all the time to us.
So is it just, okay, I've heard it, it's a group I identify with, so I can pass it, I don't have to invest anything else in it, I just accept it?
Yeah, I think it's related to confirmation bias, so we feel good about it because they're in our group. Here's a good example. I was watching basketball with my brother-in-law the other night, and secretly I'm a Boston Celtics, was rooting for him, and he was rooting for Dallas. And whenever there was a call, a referee call, we disagreed. We're looking at the same silly TV. But I'm more charitable towards a referee when they make a call against the Dallas Mavericks, and he's more charitable, so we see refereeing, we see political discussions, we see religious beliefs differently when they come from people we trust and are confident in, and we identify with them in their groups. And that's why we use some of these terrible words for people who are in other groups.
They
Is a terrible word.
It is.
Cougars.
Zubies, whatever term you want. We use it in politics. We right-wing nut jobs. We use it in religion. We call people apostates, unbelievers. We refer to people as enemies. It's even in some scripture, in some translation of scripture, supposed to love our enemies, but I don't want that word in any case. So that's otherizing. So that's the bias. Have you had experience in that? How do you combat it?
Anybody that we haven't heard from?
I was gonna say, it's amazing in the sports world how prolific that is. I mean, if you're investing your money to go to a sports event, man, but I feel, for a long time, I was a diehard member. I spent many, many years there. And, and over the years that, pure disappointment. But I can go to a sports event now and just enjoy it. I mean, I can get riled up. But you can see just the out of controlness in a sporting event. And so you know, here we're all like, I would say our defenses are down, you know? But man, in the sporting world, it is intense.
Do you think it's worse in the partisan politics world?
I've certainly, I've seen evidence that it's just as bad or worse, you know?
So right now in the United States, if you measure your acceptance that violence is an appropriate expression of political disagreement, that level of disagreement is as high today in the United States as it was in Northern Ireland in the 70s.
That is crazy.
So it's probably not that way with us, you know, the fact that we're here and engaging kind of these thoughts, but.
Sounds biased.
But you're my in-group, and you're all beautiful.
It's really scary that that's the case.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I don't know, but that is the bias that exists in our brains. How do we combat that?
I think participating and supporting groups like Braver, you know,
Braver Angels Show.
And, you know, some of the other political movements here locally, I think getting involved and supporting and learning, that's one way.
Get to know people. I used to challenge my students that had a lot of biases in college and just say, until you know 3 people from that group, you're not allowed to make a determination on what you think about that group.
Yeah.
And generally when they do, they don't have the same opinions that they would have.
Yep.
And Julia knows this about me and Ross too, but I'm training to be a mindfulness teacher and I've practiced mindfulness for years and years in the Theravada tradition, which translates as clear seeing, right? So we're taught clear seeing. And I don't identify as Buddhist or LDS. I'm not in your group, y'all.
But you are.
Watch your mind. See what you think of me now. Anyway, the idea being that as you sit and you watch your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings, you come to see how impermanent, immaterial they are. And you know, it's fun to do these practices where like I'll go a whole day where I'll just like notice the judgments, right? Like that'll be my goal. Like, oh, judging this, judging that. And I won't go on, but I found it to be a really useful way to delve into those beliefs and those biases and to see them more clearly and recognize them in real time, right? So you practice on the cushion, and then as you're going about your life, you're like, oh, just recognize that as a thought, as a judging thought, or as this or that, or this emotion or this anxiety. And so turning toward that and really being able to be with it. And it takes active training.
Thanks for sharing that. So I got a couple of things out of that. Number one, you're beautiful. So you're in my in group. You introduced a specific practice that I don't do. I think I want to explore that practice. So thank you for suggesting that.
Her rates are reasonable.
They are now, which becomes a guru.
Yeah, get in on the Wi-Fi subscription right now. But the second thing is that this doesn't go away quickly. Maybe it doesn't go away at all, but the work that you're doing, that if you want to address this, is kind of a long-term effort. There isn't a pill to take on this. There isn't a simple mantra to go through. It's deep introspection into who we are. So thanks for sharing that. And you know, as I've gone through this, and partly the reason I wrote this book is that I have failed at this in a number of instances and damaged relationships. And I've realized how hard it will be for me. Maybe it's just me, but I think it's probably a human condition, how hard it is to address these kinds of biases in a permanent, subconscious, automatic way. Takes real work. And
I don't want you to think I'm, ooh, when I say this, but you know, as a musician, we deal in frequencies. And, you know, the auditory is just part of the, what do you call that whole spectrum of wavelengths? Things vibrate, we're vibrating humans, and people vibrate differently. They're attracted to the same chords or whatever, you know, the same frequencies as other people, whatever that means, you know, negatively or positively. And I think everyone at a primal sense feels the desire to be loved and accepted and valued. And my train just derailed. But it has something to do with why we're attracted to, yeah, if you're out of sync, but you're in sync with other people because you're feeling the same kind of anger or the same kind of whatever. And so, you know, it's hard to talk to other people of opposing viewpoints because we all are insecure at one time or another about our beliefs as well. And so it's really hard, like in my family, just like the nation is split right down the middle politically, it goes all the way down to family level, I think probably for many of us, if not all of us. And so I finally just had to like make an intervention and then say, I care about my family more than I care about Republicans and Democrats. And if we can't really talk about this without this negative energy always happening, then let's just not talk about it because I value you more than politics. Because I mean, that you kind of have to come to that kind of a place eventually, and you can still like hang on to your team and all that kind of stuff, but it's not doing any of us any good until we figure out a way to get along again. And that's the crux of the matter. That's what you're trying to teach us about, actually. It's hard.
It's really hard.
To listen to other people and not
Yeah.
and not put your own wall up. Like, no, that's not right. You can't. You kind of just have to look at him as a person and one of acceptance and love and respect. And
You get to, I think, a real important principle here that I think is a good, to the degree that there's simple antidotes to this kind of a disease. It deals with reflecting that everyone has dignity. There's actually a group that's active in Utah. It's called the Dignity Project. It's also a national group, but and there's LDS statements about this where we recognize that everyone has dignity. Everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone's opinions deserve to be valued. We don't hear that a whole lot in the LDS church, but it's there if you find it. You know, if you're looking for it, you'll find it. So I think when we feel uncomfortable that someone else is not in our group, we can consciously reframe our definition of what a group is. And there's no person, maybe there are a few, but there are rare exceptions where there is no commonness that can't pull them into our group. And so you can reframe that instead of they are Republicans and Democrats, they are family members. They are, you know, that there is a commonness to that. In an LDS theology, we are one human family. So there is that element that we can bring to the equation and think of ourselves in that common frame. And then we move them from, I'm not sure which side of the brain it is, but we move them from thinking about them as outsiders to thinking about them as insiders, and our ability to relate to them is better. Go ahead, and then I'll move on to one more bias.
Something that it sure does for me. There's certain phrases or certain taglines, headlines that are said, and as soon as you say that word, then suddenly you enter into this violation of their identity and their confirmation biases and so on. But if you hold the view that you talked about, everybody has dignity, everybody's basically good. The realities of practice are not, even on immigration, just about any policy I can think of, is more complex than the headline. The headline business is terrible disservice because it's not nuanced enough. It's not true. It's not real. It doesn't apply to real life. And so if we can deal with certain issues
avoiding those little landmines that are all over, we can accomplish a great deal together. I live in a very ultra conservative community that's all rural, that's all Trump. And there are people that have lived there for generations, and what I found from there, if I focus on some of the things they say politically, or that you know, light me up in a not good way, it's not very helpful, it's not very valuable. But these are some of the most kind and passionate and loving, good people. They've saved my life a few times, and they've helped me in so many ways, and I think that reality is much more true than all these headlines. All these headlines that we think we believe so much, but in practice, I don't think they don't mean a lot, actually.
But Jay, just checkpoint me. If I did, maybe we're probably ready to sum up, and then we can have some other. Okay, well, let me toss out one more form of bias, and then I want to pose some unanswerable questions to you, because that's fun. And I mean, I've struggled with these questions for a couple of years now, so maybe you can actually answer them for me. I think that'd be great. So you guys have to help me, and maybe I need a class. Maybe more than a class.
I'm watching my missionary
I think the ground is fertile. How does that go? There's some Mormon scripture about the field is already to harvest there for you. So I've got 5 more, and I'm gonna just briefly say 4, and then we'll talk about one of them. Okay. So one is confidence bias. If someone speaks with a confident voice, we tend to believe them. And it's useful in trivial pursuits, because, you know, the confidence might be justified there, and I really don't know a lot about, I mean, do we still play Trivial Pursuits? Is that a game anyone's heard of? Yeah. It's an old game, right? But I never knew the drinking stuff. And, you know, they often had drinking questions in there, like, what is, when you put this and that, you know, I had no idea. But in any case, we tend to believe in a cognitively wrong way that if someone's confident about something, that they're probably right. And confidence and accuracy don't necessarily align. Second is contact bias. And you talked a little bit about immigration. I have views on immigration. I have no contact, meaningful contact on immigration. Doesn't really affect my community. I'm not an immigrant. I don't have children that are immigrants. You know, I have a daughter who's an immigration attorney. So I know a little bit, but I know so little about it. It's this 0.0000000. But I think I know a lot about it because I've read newspaper articles. I've listened to a podcast with a PhD. So, you know, I got this one down. You know, I don't have this one down. I know almost nothing about other people's lives. I only know something about my own. So we have bias when we are unable, when we're too far removed from issues. And we misinterpret things. We should be very humble about that. There's something called conspiratorial bias, where some people, and this isn't necessarily a biological or a neurological issue, but there's a bias that when you tend to distrust authority, that you start seeing conspiracy where it's not. Now, sometimes there's reasons why there are conspiracies, and some are real. But when there's a distrust in institutions, religion, government, whatever, we make up stories to explain why bad things are happening. And that's a form of bias. Now, the last one I want to talk about a little bit more, again, is one of my favorite ones. It's called the Dunning-Kruger bias. Does anyone want to take a crack at describing what that is?
Yes.
I think you're smarter than you are.
Yeah, yeah, basically it is.
The less you know, the smarter you feel.
You really
Or you feel really smart.
Smart at one thing,
some athlete that everyone's asking parenting questions because they're doing something, so they think they know everything.
Yeah, so, and we do it in ourselves, so we overestimate our knowledge about issues. And the more educated you are, the more you suffer from this bias. So the studies, the funny studies on this are, when you survey software developers, 80% of them think they're in the top 5% of software developers. And, you know, the math just doesn't work there. And I don't think that's like a feeling of knowing. I think that's kind of a laboratory test. 5%, 80% can't be that good, right? And so basically it is, we think we know more than we do. We project the expertise because we have expertise in one area into other areas. As Rochelle's husband, I would suggest that there's an adjacent term here called mansplaining. Is that right? Good.
What does that mean?
Let me tell you. So, you know, we project any sort of confidence we have in one area into other areas. So I don't know if we need to talk about that a lot. I don't know exactly how to completely overcome that. I'm a victim of this. I'm well educated. I was, you know, high in my profession. I got paid a lot, you know, that kind of stuff. All those are reinforcing characteristics that contribute more to this. It's not only attached to the Y chromosome. So, you know, it does appear there also for some women.
It's contagious.
And maybe it is contagious. So a few thoughts about this one.
Well, that one worked really well for me years ago, but then the internet came.
But they're wrong. It's disinformation. It's fake news.
And so it doesn't work for me anymore. My kids call me on it, my wife calls me on it, so I've become more humble.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on anything anymore.
You might be one of the first people I've met who doesn't think that the internet makes them the expert on it.
Well, I read that on the internet.
I think this is the same bias, but it also plays into like if you're playing a chess game against somebody who's higher rated than you are and you beat them, it's because you're actually really good and not rated as high as you can be. But if you lose to someone who's not as good as yours, because you had a bad day.
Yeah.
So the way you interpret your wins or your losses is if you have a bias about how good you are.
That's a good one. And you know, you probably can put that in another category all its own. It does touch on this bias, but yeah, we do interpret the world in a pretty personal centric way. You know, the fact that I prayed for rain because I'm a farmer. No, I prayed for it not to rain because I have a baseball game and I don't want it to be rained out. Cancels out the farmer's prayer for the rain. You know, so I think we do live in this individually centric point of view and interpret things just through our own eyes in a way that creates this kind of bias. How do we overcome this one?
I'll answer your question that I've read most of like Jonathan Haidt's books. And you know, he kind of talks about this bias with like the toilet. It's like, you know how toilet work? Yeah, of course I know how toilet works. Okay, explain it to me how you would build a toilet and how it actually works. And the vast majority of people like, they start, they're like, well, there's this lever. Okay, right. And then they go, well, I'm not really sure.
And then magic happens.
You know, so to answer your question, I would say, for me, it's being curious. And if you're always in a state of curiosity and recognizing that you don't know everything and you're curious, then you continue to learn. And then your field of vision, you know, I look at it as a field of vision, you know, and it's like, if you're not curious, your field of vision is really small, it's really narrow. The more curious you are, the bigger that vision is.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not sure I would have mentioned that. I think that's very insightful. And I think it's to some extent a way of inoculating ourselves against the feeling of dissonance that comes from examining our feelings of knowing. Because if we write a story to ourselves, that we are curious people. And we want to understand why people believe something differently, or that, do I really know that? Why do I think I know that? You know, what could I read that would help me know whether my first off belief here is has any sort of merit? If we get into that curious mode, then it allows us to examine some of these prior beliefs. Now, we sometimes do live in a society where curiosity is discouraged. And that may be a cultural set of baggage that you carry. I think sometimes that can get inbred to us in a way that we don't want to question. We don't want to ask hard things. We don't want to examine other people's lived experiences. And so there may still be barriers for us to overcome to move to that point where we're comfortable, maybe even releasing dopamine because we're curious. If we can get our brains to release dopamine around this stuff, then it becomes more natural. Go ahead.
I wondered about this. There's also I think one of the things that prevents even moving to a place of curiosity is a shame that you don't know something. And there's this, I don't know where that comes from. I mean, I've experienced that a lot. I'm just like, oh, I want to be seen as if I know something, as if I'm smart or something. I think that's not uncommon.
Rochelle would suggest that it's partly attached to the white chromosome.
Might just be that. So so there's, I don't know how that's connected, but I think that's what.
Well, I mean, I think
it can sometimes keep us from moving to the place of, gosh, I don't really understand your view. I don't really understand, help me understand that. Or I don't know if I know, like you're saying, I don't know if I really understand what the issues are around immigration.
Maybe it's a corollary to this competency or this confidence bias. So we respect people that are confident and we tend to believe them. And a corollary of that is that when we ourselves feel uncertain about our beliefs, maybe we have some dissonance and it's hard for us to go there.
Yeah, it's somehow, I mean, it's connected to that ego, I guess.
Yeah. So I think the bottom line with all of this stuff is this is hard work. It's lifetime work. You have to decide whether you want to do it because it takes energy. Not everyone wants to do it, and I'm not suggesting everyone should. But to the degree that you do, you will see the world more clearly. You will honor and respect other people in a different way because you'll be open to their experience. You'll find ways to pull them into your circle so that you can listen and understand from them. You can rewrite the script inside your brain that makes you more open to this, but it takes work and it can become more and more natural. You won't get rid of the bias because it's just physical in there. I mean, maybe there's a spirit in there too, you have to figure that out for yourself on what you think, but there is physicalness in there. And that's the way we think. That's the way we store memories. That's the way we store beliefs. It's the way we come to certain opinions, and that is finite. So we're always going to be living with that, and that should not disturb us. It should simply make us aware of these limitations.
Could you please give a shout out to neuroplasticity as you sum up? Because, talking about how it's in there and fixed, and I'm thinking, yeah, but we can rewire and all this stuff. So, and what you've read and how you understand it.
So I'm not an expert on that. I am maybe more, the only thing that I would touch on that I think is that an important part of the way we see the world is it's not only interpreted through our genetics and our culture and our lived experience, it also comes through the story we tell ourselves about who we are. And that's a story that we can rewrite. And maybe that's, I don't know how much, I think I'm always going to have some of these biases because it's finite, but I do know I can rewrite my story and I can decide I'm a different person and I can decide to be more curious and more open. I can decide to read and try and immerse myself in other people's experience because I want to and I dignify them. And it will change my underlying political or social, maybe religious beliefs there. So in that sense, it's evolving. I think you're going more towards how much can brains change after certain points of view, and would you say that they can change more than we think?
I think there's still a lot in that area that is being researched, but it looks promising, you know, and what we practice was stronger. So the rewriting of the story is the rewiring of your brain. What are these areas that we need to rewrite and therefore rewire?
Someone referred to Jonathan Haidt, however you say his name. Haidt.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about, where was I going on this? He talks a lot about how our beliefs come from underlying values that we hold. And he would say a lot of it is genetic, but a lot of it can be the story that we tell ourselves about what we value. Now, I want to get to some of the hard questions that I just don't have an answer for. So my book has the word peacemaker in it. And I wrote that intentionally because it comes out of the words of Jesus, blessed are the peacemakers. And Jesus wasn't trying to be braver angels, you know, he wasn't trying to reconcile Roman rule and, you know, create a bipartisan initiative in, you know, ancient Israel to, you know, have a pluralistic society, you know, that he was talking about an inner journey for all of us to become peacemakers. So I value the term peacemaker, but at times I'm deeply troubled by certain issues in society that seem to stubbornly hang on, that are inconsistent with the values that I hold true to be in society. So there's this book that was written called In Defense of Incivility. I think that's the title. And it basically says the reason we had slavery for so long is people were trying to be civil. And they weren't facing the horrid reality. And so the North and the South and the Senate, you know, they'd always be polite and they'd have cordial relations, as we were talking about kind of the political issues of, you know, what is that, the 18th century?
Sure about that?
Yeah. Do the math, buddy. But, you know, in the 1830s and 1840s, he argues that we perpetuated the issues of the day of slavery. And he would also argue Jim Crow. He'd also argue the lack of equal opportunity and rights for women. He would argue other marginalized populations. He doesn't specifically mention the queer community, but I'm sure that that would be there too. Where there are groups of people that are just systematically disadvantaged. This is my point of view. You may see me as ugly after I express it, but that's fine. But there's groups of people that are systematically disadvantaged in society. And I'm passionate about that. And being passive about it seems to be inconsistent with the values that I hold as those being so important. And so the question is, how do I be a peacemaker and still be an activist? And I'll tell you, I'm going to have a hard time having a conversation where I'm going to respect someone that wants to return to chattel slavery. You know, that would be an impossible conversation for me. And I use that as the most extreme, and there's all sorts of gradations away from that where we perpetuate marginalization, in my humble opinion. So I don't know how to reconcile those two. I don't know how to reconcile wanting to have positive and engagement and respecting of people who have different points of view, and at the same time holding passionately particular views that I think touch on dignity, equality, respect, opportunity in society. So that's something I've struggled with for a couple of years. Is he right? Does civility get in the way of progress? Was the civil rights era uncivil. I mean, Martin Luther King preached nonviolence, but he wasn't civil. Right? I mean, they boycotted buses, they marched in Selma, you know.
There's an argument.
Ability.
That helped.
I make a comment?
A great deal, because it has violence.
There's a book called The Sword,
Yep.
which is Malcolm X, and The Shield,
Yep.
which is MLK. And how they existed together. So, you know, how does that work? And I know there's an author named Patrick Mason who wrote a book called Proclaim Peace. He's a strong advocate for nonviolence in all cases. So I struggle with that. I struggle to know what to do, and maybe you have the answer.
The answer.
There has to be one answer, right, in a single sentence, or put in a pill that we can take.
Or equation.
Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Well, I don't have the answer, but what I hear from you is a very, very strong hold on peacemaking, like a really tight hold on that. And the one thing I heard you say was that that comes from Christ. But I'm wondering what else, why are you holding so tight to that one that makes the other one, the other side, unavailable to you, which is to be uncivil? Does that make sense? Like,
They seem to be in a conflict in my mind, and maybe they shouldn't be. You know, maybe there's a way that they coexist in productive ways. But I'm kind of tired of some of these issues in society. I'm really kind of fatigued by our inability to resolve these issues.
and history would show us that often it isn't the peacemaking that resolves the issue. It is. So.
We did have
yeah,
something called
finding
the Civil
some-
War, didn't we? And it wasn't called the In-Civil War. I mean, that's a contradiction there, I think.
And I wonder if we're hanging on to peacemaking because of Christ's teaching it, if we understand his teaching of that word and of that behavior. Or
Yeah,
if we've put our own peacemaking means no conflict, means whatever these things are. And I would think actually that people might define that word differently.
Yes, like.
So when you say peacemaking, you know, it might mean something different than what it may mean to her.
Kristen says she has the answer.
thank you, Kristen.
I don't have the answer, but Gandhi taught what you're saying is a nonviolence or ahimsa has to come from here, right? But nonviolence doesn't mean not doing something to upset people. It means you do it with love and with respect for that person, and you're willing to take the consequences. So it's like Thoreau going to prison. It's like the March on Selma, they didn't hurt anybody. I mean, that's not uncivil. It's being strong for what you believe in, but having that inner core of nonviolence. That's a bad word, but ahimsa in the Sanskrit. There's no conflict between being a strong activist and a respecter of people.
Yeah,
Kristen,
so what?
just real quick, Kristen, you're part of, you.
Well, the Gandhi Alliance.
The Gandhi Alliance, yeah, so she's well studied in this, you know.
So maybe you can give an example of what activist activity you would consider, name a specific example that would be counter to peace.
So I think it is maybe seeking out disagreement with the goal of trying to change people's minds, even if it has personal cost.
That's counter to peace.
I don't know. I don't know.
Randy Paul's on here.
Yeah, can I
Hi,
talk?
Randy.
Hi, everybody.
Real quick, so Randy, can we hear you?
Yeah,
Are you,
I'm speaking.
he's been involved in global peace
Can you-
initiatives stuff, but.
How do I go on?
Well, we can't hear. He's not muted. Do you want to text it to me and I'll try to read it?
Uh,
And then
Why that's happening, though, is, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think sometimes that peacemaking is just a practical decision, so I happen to be in politics. I'm working in election reform, I do some women's stuff and LGBT issues, and we often sit in rooms and say, we can't say this and we can't do that, because if you offend the powers that be, you can't make progress in legislation or, and it comes back to this slow changing hearts, one person telling stories. Because sometimes, even though that incivility works, sometimes in big movements, like in our state, in these issues, we have to be civil, don't offend, don't say certain things. or
Hello.
We don't have a seat at the table and we can't make any progress. So I think sometimes it doesn't go together, but we do it to try to make progress because it seems more practical than doing things in a more extreme way.
I think we need to be practical on this, so I think that is an element to the equation, is we will not make changes by screaming into the void.
Yeah.
We have to find practical ways to express this.
But we want to sometimes, we want to scream into.
And sometimes we find our own private voids to scream into, right? But then there's time for practical engagement. So, I think I appreciate that. Go ahead.
I was thinking the same thing a lot of people are voicing, because we had this conversation at dinner tonight. I struggle with exactly what you're saying, but for me, it's a conscious choice, because I would literally probably lose a lot of people that I love and have to make a conscious choice to lose the people I love if I became as passionate and political as I wanted to about several of the issues.
Yeah. I think some people, and I think we have to be careful that we don't put this burden on others, including ourselves. I think some people are willing to pay those prices. And I admire them. And I think we have to be really thoughtful about what works for us. But ultimately, both MLK and Malcolm X were murdered, right?
Yeah, to be honest, I'd rather be murdered than lose my family. But I'd like to be there.
Unless you were murdered by your family.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't think peace means lack of conflict. And so that's where we're back to, how do you define peace?
Yeah.
But it is a matter of not intentionally harming. And which, comes to where you are, the conflict, there is a difference. How do I get at that difference without an intentional harm to you? So it disarms your defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't mean there is no difference.
So Mason uses the term positive conflict in his book. Can't remember what it's called, but it'll come to me. Proclaim Peace. Thank you. And I also think that what you're saying is there also has to be practical conflict. Has to be thoughtful and planned conflict. And we live in a world of constraints, and we're not going to get everything done that I want to on this scale. I'm not going to get everything done. I'm not sure anyone shares my goals, but maybe you do. But we're not going to get it done on a time frame that I'm comfortable with. So there'll be disappointment there. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I'm talking so much, but one of my favorite scenes from Fiddler on the Roof is when they're having a political discussion in the marketplace, and someone says one thing and he says, "You're right." And the other one says another thing and he says, "You're right." And then the third person says, "Well, they can't both be right." And he goes, "You're right." But you really can't take something that's right and something that's wrong and compromise and have something that's right, okay? And Chris and I are involved in the Latino community, and there are people, that are undocumented, some are here legally, some aren't legally, and some are, and we're conflicted about what's going on, okay? And the immigration laws are terrible and there ought to be reform. And so when I hear somebody, say how bad our immigration is and how these guys shouldn't be here, and, it's hard for me because I have contact with them, I have contact bias, okay? And so what I found is to, you're asking solutions. One of the way I deal with it is to say, I don't know the answer, but I do know Pedro, okay? And I tell them the story of Pedro, okay? and how he got here and why he's here. And how he sends 90% of his money back, home. And, I tell them a story and help them have contact bias, okay? So that they could understand a little bit about it. So that's how I address it, because, but it's easy to want to be quiet and say, yeah, I understand. They ought to close the border because they're in here illegally. But then on the, we ought to have a guest, worker program. I have all these ideas, but I don't know the answers. But I do know Pedro.
I want to just pause here, and we've got some people on Zoom that are wanting to participate here. But you're having a problem with volume. Are there some questions that came in the comments that?
Why don't you read what Randy said? Randy's been involved in a global group for many years to work, like the Palestinian and Israeli.
So he says, I want to have lunch with David. He would love the work we are doing to engage trustworthy rivals and adversaries who desire to convert by means of mutual persuasion. Just got back from Iran and Israel and had some success we could talk about. I'd love to go to lunch with you, Randy. There's another group, and I mentioned this in my book. It's called the Templeton Institute. It's probably something Randall's familiar with. And there's some really good professional involvement that deal with some of these intractable problems. And I think ultimately, let me just talk a little bit about this group, Templeton. I'm not familiar with the group Randall's talking about. And I hope to be able to talk with you over lunch sometime. But the Templeton Institute has something called covenantal pluralism. And what they do is they enter into deep engagements around conflicting issues. And the reason they use the term covenantal is they make a commitment to each other to understand their needs and to engage in good faith in context of the respect of other people. And they use covenant because it's more than contractual, but it's kind of the rules of the game where they say there's that people will advocate passionately and the opposing points of view will be in commitment with that person's ability to express their passionate points of view. And they find the common ground that can be found. And, so there are groups like this that kind of focus in on that. And I'm not of a professional class, so I'm not sure that I could ever kind of participate in that kind of a group or be involved in that kind of setting. I'm just a regular Joe that, is trying to do something and compile research. But there are those kinds of groups that have structures to be able to engage positively. And maybe you're seeing that in a political sense in Utah, which, that's hard to do because there isn't equal power between the points of view. And so it would be a cost to the group that has more power to bring in that voice that has less power into those discussions. But so I don't have an answer, and I still don't have an answer, but I want to struggle with this one. And the reason I raise it is I want you to struggle with it too. I want you to figure out for yourself how, and your issues may be different than mine. They likely are. All of us come from a different place where the passionate issues that you have, that you want to create change in society, that you find ways that you can engage in that passion in a way that brings that voice, helps create a change. And as you enter that discussion, you will find that you have to be willing to change yourself. You have to be willing to learn. You have to be curious. You have to be open. You have to put that certainty of the feeling of knowing and enter into good faith discussions along that line. So I'm not sure I have much more to say. I don't know if we want to have continued dialogue or this is a good point to kind of conclude. And we can chat around the donut table, which I did not forget about.
Let's give David a hand. I would just like to close with one little thing. I have a picture of a card This was a Dr. John M. Opitz that Jane worked with, and so did Haley's husband, Gil. He passed away last year. He was a remarkable man in all respects. He was a Catholic. And this card was given out at his funeral, his Catholic funeral. You might know it as the prayer of St. Francis. Sometimes it's called Christian prayer, but it speaks well to, I think, what you're calling us to do. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in the giving that we receive, it is in the pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Donuts and such. And that's, thanks to Ross. Thanks to our hosts again. Thanks to all of you for your comments. It was awesome.
I
Thanks
have
to David.
4 copies of the book if you want. They're $20 and there's free bookmarks. So party favors. And there's
I
donuts.
meant to give Rochelle the last word. Diane. You have anything to say? Diane?
That's wonderful.
So I think about when was Christ uncivil and when was he?
Julia.
He's really only uncivil with those lame he was never uncivil to the average person. He sat with he understood that. That helped the key. And so maybe to the audience.